to see how it goes.
Yes. So, is bigger government better government? We're gonna discuss the arguments for a bigger government first. And so, in general, just to give you a little introduction, higher taxation will lead to increased spending on public goods. The expansion of social security and safety net programs is a really important point. Healthcare can be made more available to the people, to the folks, and also regulations protect consumers, which is a big difference with the small government that we're going to talk about later. And the GDP, the economical growth, is a big one as well, and it goes through increased spending. So, yeah.
Yeah, so a bigger government is necessary because it will allow a nation to prosper through abundant government spending on the public and abundant regulation. This will allow the poorest of people in a country to thrive and the oppressed to receive a voice. By increasing military power, border control, and big government programs like Medicare, a bigger government increases safety to its people any way possible and any way that it can.
We talk about fiscal policy, higher income tax, that's what I mean. A tax on a percentage of individual income. So income taxes were raised, for example, during the Great Depression, as you may know, and that means record rates during World War II of 90% on the top bracket, and the higher income rates allow for funding of public goods. While the income tax was high, it did not affect the economy in a negative way. So that's an important point, and bigger government will always call for higher taxes in order to fund programs and stuff. So, yeah.
Because of these increased taxes, there allows government to spend increased spending on public goods, and these public goods go to all people within a nation. And so, due to increased funding, which is taxes, a bigger government can spend more on the public. This means more infrastructure like roads, highways, public transportation, sewage, public buildings in areas like parks, and public education. A bigger government will create more jobs, like in 2012 when 90% of the U.S. population was reachable by roads and highways. And $75 billion investment will create more than 3.5 million jobs and $464 billion in nationwide sales, as we saw in the article that we read.
If we talk about regulations, they're implemented in order to increase information about products in order to protect the public, so it can reduce corruption, monopoly pricing, and danger to the folks, to the citizens. There are short-term costs to a business. So one of the quotes or citations is when done well, keeps competition honest and free. So we think that one is, we can relate to that one when we talk about bigger government.
So another thing that will happen within a bigger government is a growth of GDP, or gross domestic product. This happens through Keynesian economics, is normally the school of thought that a bigger government will tend to implement. And this sparks growth in the economy by pumping money into the economy through government spending, which some of the stuff we talked about before. For example, in the Obama-era stimulus package to turn around the economy after the Great Recession of 2008, or an earlier example would be the Marshall Plan, which pushed funds into war-torn Europe to try and revitalize the war-torn nations there.
So the next slide is about expansion of social security and safety net programs. Safety net programs are designed to help citizens during their retirement, and so retirement benefits basically are increased to include like all Americans instead of just a specific group. Safety net allows people to flourish longer in life, obviously, and Medicare is public funded. Healthcare for elderly. also Medicaid public funded welfare program for impoverished aids in getting help out, getting people out of poverty, basically. So that's a really important point regarding the Social Security and stuff.
Another example of a policy that bigger governments will implement is their policy on healthcare. By having a bigger government, your increased spending into healthcare field will allow for more medical breakthroughs, as well as with a bigger government, the government can fund research and development of new drugs and new medical techniques and practices, and also nationalize healthcare. It makes healthcare available to all people. So that is a part of big government and healthcare.
So one of the examples that was mentioned in the article that we've read was National Defense Education Act, also called or abbreviated EA, my bad. So it talks about basically it's billions in grants, loans, technical training and other educational programs, and they were all supported by the National Defense Education Act. This helped students, for example, so us to go to college, and it helped schools to have better funding that leads to better education on the longer term. So.
And finally, we just wanted to end our argument for why a bigger government is better by a quote from Madrick, which was the article we read. So this is a quote of a benefit. So public goods such as roads and schools benefit society overall more than any individual or business. Such investment would not have been adequately undertaken by private firms. Government support is required for primary education, roads, and the poor. So there's many benefits inside of a bigger government, and that's why we believe it is necessary according to this argument, as it allows for increased spending on public goods. And now we're going to discuss why we believe an argument for a limited or small government. So just a little introduction here. We believe that a smaller government leads to a more efficient and flexible system built upon traditional American values. A smaller government will have low taxes, which will allow for economic freedom of citizens. A smaller government will have a decrease in regulations to a minimum in order for businesses to thrive economically and have more freedom. There is more individual freedom and a protection of rights, as well as a freer market, which helps the economy and small businesses.
So a smaller government, right? A smaller or limited government is necessary because it will not infringe upon the unalienable rights of humans by allowing free markets to bolster the economy and giving basically the most individual freedom to its citizens, while at the same time maintaining basic order and human rights protection. So yeah, that's a big one. Also, smaller government generally in general leads to a more efficient and flexible system than a bigger government. A limited government will theoretically result in a balanced budget each year due to obviously a smaller spending. Libertarian belief that government exists simply to protect the rights of the individual, and that comes most commonly is the rights from Locke. A smaller government results in less corruption in politics, and in politics, how do you say it? The politicians don't have the amount of power to misuse the power. So that's another great benefit of a small government.
Some duties of a limited government, like we previously mentioned about Lockean principles of government's job is to protect life, liberty, and property. A limited government should keep government interference upon the general population at a minimum, and it should only engage in necessary foreign political conflicts.
So we're talking about individualism and freedom. A limited government is designed with liberty in mind. So a limited government does not restrict people in their daily lives or choices, or they don't infringe on their rights. Protection of private property and the right to own private property is another real a huge point for small government. And one of the citations that we think relates really well to this topic is the following: private property, free markets, and fiscal restraint are important foundations for liberty, by Boas on page 22. So you can look it up on page 22 again. Yeah, you're gonna tell.
So, as a direct contrast from bigger government, which will have higher taxes for increased spending, a smaller government will obviously have lower taxes. So taxes are reduced to allow businesses and free markets to thrive, because there's more money being put into those businesses, so they're allowed to have more freedom of choice with their money. Keeping taxation at a minimum in order to finance necessary government functions. So they'll still finance the necessary government functions, but not have overreaches. And because of less taxes, households and businesses will have increased disposable income, which they can invest into the economy, which will help it grow and allow GDP to increase.
The next slide is about regulations. So there's fewer rules to be followed and to be enforced. It focuses more on protection of people and their property. And obviously, as we've told you before, early in this presentation, there's more individual freedom. So a libertarian belief of do what you want as long as you don't violate someone else's rights. That's kind of the idea of the libertarians. So yeah.
And then of course there would be freer markets, or just free markets will be allowed to roam free in a smaller government, which creates an environment for small businesses and businesses in general to take off and thrive, as it'll allow for more increased competition. And these businesses don't have to worry about certain regulations allowing for maximum amount of innovation and production within their certain field. And that's why we believe a smaller government is better for government.
Thank you for watching.
Yes, great.